Museum of Anthropology and to this all-day symposium on endangered languages, indigeneity, community and creative practices. To begin, we will have Larry Grant, Musqueam elder, our respected friend, welcome us. Larry.
Thank you, Karen, for that introduction. I want to say thank you to the symposium organizers for requesting that we be here to do a welcome. I want to say thank you to everyone that's here this morning. I'm one of the descendants of the people that first welcomed the new visitors to this land. Our great-great-great-grandparents were here to greet the Spanish ship under Captain Narvaez and the English ship under Captain George Vancouver. And as our ancestors did in the past, I do this morning and welcome all of you here at UBC on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people. And all of this is oral history. They have it in the journals of the Spanish and the English. And it's the recognized territory of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people prior to the development of the doctrine of discovery. So I'm happy to be here to welcome all of you here on the ancestral, unceded, occupied lands of the Musqueam people.
Thank you, Larry. We're grateful to be hosted on this land by the Musqueam people. My name is Karen Duffek. I'm Curator of Contemporary Visual Arts in Pacific Northwest here at the museum. And I had the privilege to organize with the artist John Wynne his exhibition of Anspayaxw, an installation for voice, image and sound, which just opened at the Satellite Gallery downtown on Thursday evening. And it's on until October 26th, so we hope you'll have a chance to see that. I'm so pleased to be able to welcome you here today for what promises to be an engaging and thoughtful program of ideas, discussion and performance around the timely and urgent topic of endangered languages in relation to their documentation and strengthening, the role of digital technologies in archiving and revitalizing languages, and questions around cross-cultural collaborations in both research and creative practice. The program was developed primarily by John Wynne, media anthropologist Kate Hennessy, and linguist Tyler Peterson. And joining them in the 3 sessions today are a pretty amazing group of distinguished speakers, some of whom have traveled from quite a far distance to get here, and some from our own backyard here at UBC. A special welcome to elders Louise Wilson, Barbara Harris, and Larry Grant, who all expressed enthusiasm to take part today. We received generous contributions from a number of funders who made this symposium possible. From UBC, the Irving K. Barber Learning Center, the First Nations Languages Program, the Department of Anthropology, and this museum. Also from Simon Fraser University and its School of Interactive Arts and Technology. Tyler Peterson's University of Arizona, and the Creative Research into Sound Arts Practice Center in London, UK. Thanks to all of these. My job today is to be the mean, draconian timekeeper. And I've already failed since we've started 15 minutes late, but we'll make a go of it. We have a really, really tight schedule because we need to be out of this space to make room for another group at 4:30. So we'll have to stick to that schedule. So please note the times on your program, especially for lunch and the break, because we're going to strive to be on the dot with each session. For lunch and breaks, we have the MOA Cafe, which has been warned that there'll be a hungry horde descending on them around 12:15 or so. And after the afternoon break, we'll be gathering in the Great Hall for Peter Moran's performance, created especially for this gathering. The whole symposium is being recorded by UBC's Barber Centre to be webcast and made accessible to people who couldn't be here today. So apparently it'll be up in a couple of days or so. Our speakers have all signed permission forms, but if any of you in the audience who want to ask questions during the discussion times who don't want to be filmed, let us know. So let me know, or Connie, who's right at the back there, or Jill Baird here, and we could ask the question for you if you would like. And please also, of course, turn off your cell phone and beepers and any recording devices, please. And I welcome John and Tyler to the stage to begin.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming today. I'm going to start off right away. What I would like to do is draw your attention to this short film here.
Nach nie la algach agwyn eiti. Nid am the gedulbund kiwten. Afsam la oed la algach lachsan algach loed.
Okay, so that was Bob Wilson, who's the speaker of Giksanamuk, which is the language of the Giksan people who live in the north central coast. It's a part of the Tsimshianic languages there. And I wanted to, I started off with that because I wanted to get a sense for the language that he speaks, his speech rhythm, the sounds, the things that he chooses to talk about. Because this is why John and I are up here right now. This is something that has inspired my work for the past 8 years or so, and also John's and our collaboration together. So Giksan is an endangered language. There are no concrete numbers of speakers. It varies between 200 and 400 speakers. So it is actually an endangered language, like many of the languages, or practically all of these languages here. This is a visual map of the kind of linguistic diversity that we have in British Columbia, which Giksan is a part of. So to give you an idea of the state of documentation, there's not a lot, but it's growing very quickly. There's a grammar on the language. There's some community-directed educational materials done by anthropologist Jay Powell. 3 dissertations so far, and that'll be added to. One of them is mine. And more recently, there's been a flurry of activity in the linguistics department here. So they're currently working on an e-dictionary of the language. The final stages of preparing a book of stories published by UBC Press, and also the Master Apprentice Program, which is the pairing of an elder with somebody that's learning the language. So this is taking place under the guidance of Lisa Matthewson, who's here today, and also Henry Davis. So there's a lot of exciting things happening. Just to take a step back and look at where we fit into this, in 2006, John and I embarked on a documentation project called Seeing Voices, documenting the Giksan narrative. And here's some major features of this grant, this undertaking. So one of the things that we were doing, wanted to do is create a body of video. So it's a very, very video-centric documentation project, which of course involves audio, but also photographs as well. And we were looking at naturalistic language, so focusing on people recounting personal histories or talking about things that are culturally important or things that are important to them personally. There was also a linguistics aspect of it. I'm a linguist, so there was a lot of direct elicitation that is the foundation of my research. And we're also interested in the modularity, so how different materials that we collect can be used and reassembled in different ways. That's especially an interest of mine. So as some of the outcomes, we produced over 500 very high quality photographs of various kinds, around 16 hours of video, very high quality video. That didn't really show that, but for different reasons. It funded my dissertation research, and also collaborations that I've had with a local elementary school there, and a variety of other things, including what's going to be a language repository at the local museum. So here's just a couple of photographs to give you a sense of this. So this is Denise Aricio, who is also a part of our project. So part of this was documenting the documenter. She wanted to actually document what we did. Okay, so even technical details where we sit and mic placement and things like that might be valuable later. So here's an example, a screen cap of the video. So one thing that I became very interested in after this is how we can use the video in an engaging kind of way, but it's also useful to the linguists and community members, but it's also something modular. So here we have a screen cap of Barbara Harris, who's here with us today, recounting a story of her trip on the Cardina on a boat. And we have a typical kind of language example, linguistic example. We've got the orthography of Giksan, a morphological analysis, a gloss, and a translation. So we have a growing body of video that's like this, and it functions like a DVD. You can take the titles off, or you can add them, however you like. And here is Bob again. So we've also got a large portion of our video like this, which is a transcription of the language along with the free translation that we work on with the speakers. So again, this is like a DVD. You can turn the language on, you can select English or the Giksan, whatever you like. And so here's an example of what this data looks like in a subtitle file, because it's not very useful to have language data that's burned into video. That's not very useful to anybody. So coming back to the idea of modularity that I've been working with, this is what a subtitle file looks like. So it's a plain text file that's Unicode ready. They've got these markers here that sequence this within the video and arrange that's synchronized with the audio and the video. So this is something that can be extracted and used in different ways very easily. And it's also a good way to archive as well. So backing up a little bit, so one of the things that I started thinking about this collaboration, what I've described to you here is a fairly, or very, like super briefly, is a fairly standard traditional documentation project. There's nothing really unusual about what we did in terms of the language side. There's many documentation projects like this underway around the world right now, including ones funded by the ELDP. But it got me thinking to how we can go beyond the people that we usually assume to be interested in endangered languages, so the speakers of these languages and the linguists, that there are other people that are also interested and just as passionate about the issues surrounding endangered languages. And that, so this includes, beyond this traditional pairing of the speaker in the community and the language researcher like me, the artist as well. Okay, so I think of this in terms of a triangulation. And I think about the points of this triangulation a lot. Oops. So what ties us all together here, and this is where John comes in, as being a part of a language documentation program, this is where this is a little bit innovative, to have a project of this kind that involves this sort of triangulation. And what ties us all together is another feature of this grant, which was the creative use of media. Okay. So exploring approaches to raising awareness of language endangerment through the creative use of video and all of the other materials that come out of it. So beyond just what a linguist might use them for, and talking and coordinating with the community what these can be used for. And so we were able to do this as part of our project based on two general features. Okay. So if another interested person or party, if somehow they contribute to raising the profile of the language that we're working on and awareness of the issues that are particular to that language and the goals of the community, and also skills that can complement the documentation efforts. So with John, he specializes in making field recordings. Okay, so he has a skill set that can actually be put into service beyond what I can do as a linguist. So together we can create deeper and richer materials that way. Of course, this calls up a lot of other questions about how these materials are used, okay, in terms of what John does, and he'll speak about that now. But it's a very, very exciting and interesting way to go, and the fact that this was actually funded this way shows that it can actually work, okay. So I'll turn it over to John now, and he can speak a bit more about the third point of this triangle here.
Thanks, Tyler. So I'm primarily a sound artist, so it's interesting to hear Tyler say that the primary focus was video for him for various reasons. My primary focus when I'm in the field getting materials for my work is on the sound, and that's usually what attracts me to a particular project or other. I also do site-specific installations, of which those are examples. And some of the other projects I've done, I often work with still photography rather than video and sound, because I find that there's something quite interesting that happens when you have sound, which is a time-based medium, and a photography, that the sort of stillness of photography, I feel kind of promotes closer listening in some ways, and is less distracting. I'm also quite interested in the way that people who are being recorded respond to only having a microphone as opposed to having a video camera pointed at them. I'll talk more about that. But this project with Tyler is the second time that I've worked with a linguist. So the first time was with the Hearing Voices project, where I worked with the photographer Denise Haricio, who also did the photographs for the Anspayaxw project, and with a linguist from the University of Botswana, Andy Chaban. And together with the Hans Rousing Endangered Languages project, and David Nathan, who's here today, is involved in updating this. What was originally a CD-ROM is now an app. It's available in the gallery to look at as well. And that was in addition to the installation that I produced for the Hearing Voices, which was similar in form to the Anspayaxw installation. So the installation that's at the Satellite Gallery right now is, I'm thankful to the museum and Karen for bringing it back to Vancouver. It's showed in various places. That's what it looked like here at the museum. That's a kind of 360-degree panorama. And the other shots are when it showed in San Francisco at the Anthropological Association conference last year. So these are actually flat panel speakers, so the sound comes from the photographs themselves, and it's an immersive 12-channel installation. I also wanted to play a little bit of Bob. What led me to this project, after having done the Click Language project, I wanted to do a project in Canada, and I haven't lived in Canada for a long time, so I felt with my my education was in the 60s and 70s, and there was really nothing about the history before the War of 1812. But the only thing I can remember from Canadian history when I was a kid is the War of 1812, so wanting to learn more about that side of things and educate myself a little bit was part of my interest in coming here. And I was lucky, in fact, I got in touch with various linguists at SOAS in London, who put me in touch with various people here, including Henry Davis, who I haven't met, but I understand is here, who sent me a very helpful email with various contacts and things, one of whom was Doreen Jensen, who then told me I should speak to her sister Barbara, and Barbara said I should speak to Tyler. So that's how my involvement with this particular language came about. I was also interested, in some ways I wanted to avoid the kind of exotica of working with a language where there might be only a couple of speakers. And both with this project and the Hearing Voices one, I wanted to try and find a way that what I was doing could contribute not just to my work as an artist, but to communities, to linguists, to documentation. So let me play a little bit of Bob as well, since you've heard his voice, and a little bit of this is a stereo mix down. So the installation piece is 12 channels. There's sound all around. It's coming from different sources. But so this is a sort of stereo mix down. It doesn't give you a sense of what the installation is like to experience, but it does give you a sense of what I was doing with the sound. So in this clip, you'll hear water under the frozen Anspayaxw River and various other environmental sounds, as well as Bob's voice.
Ladies and gentlemen, the portrait here is about old language from Moldova, Somalia. It's very little of that that remains here in the village, because our descent moved down to the village here about over 100 years ago, over a century ago. And that just about extincts our own language. The accent is different. I heard my great-grandmother speak it. And I'll tell you, that's real classics. You talk about Shakespeare compared to present English, that's how it was. Really deep with expression. I love to hear it. I want to use it all the time. I have no problem speaking English. I don't stutter or sputter around or snap my feet trying to speak it. But I much rather use my own. When we get together, guys like us, we don't speak English. Like my younger sister, my brother Roy here. But the next generation is entirely different. As soon as they start speaking this part English, they're speaking. They do understand, but I don't know why we call it Somalia.
I was going to play another clip, but because we got such a late start, I'm cutting this down a bit. I used the Gisanamuk language as well, but I thought it was interesting to hear him saying something from around the same section when we asked him to kind of repeat what he'd said in Gisanamuk in English. So I thought it would make an interesting comparison to the clip that Tyler played. But in the installation, people are mostly speaking both English and Gisanamuk, and sometimes more or less the same content. I digitally manipulated Denise's photographs in this way, partly to kind of make the point about translation not being a perfect mirror of language, and that translation can never really be adequate. It also the perspective in the photographs, you'll notice, is slightly different. They're not taken from the same spot. Sometimes in some of the photographs an object has been moved in between. But also kind of making the fairly obvious point that these speakers at some point won't be there. Just to thank the various people that we worked with and learned from, and the two bodies that funded the first the field work and then my production of the installation. Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll jump right into it, the first session. So the first session is on language documentation and the Anspayaxw project, and from a greater perspective, what John and I did together. So the way it's going to work is that we've got 6 speakers that are invited onto the stage one by one. I'll introduce them briefly, and then they'll take a seat, and then they'll be invited to give a 5-minute presentation. They take a seat, and then we can have a discussion about that, the things that come out of that. So it'll be very, very interesting. So I'll start with Pat Shaw, Dr. Pat Shaw. So she's a professor in the Department of Anthropology here. I don't know if we're going okay, we can clap too.
Thanks very much, Tyler. I also want to thank Anspayaxw and the Musqueam people for welcoming us here on the territory of the Musqueam people. And I want to extend my sincere thanks to the organizers of this symposium for bringing together such a creatively diverse group of people who are actively and passionately engaged with endangered languages, and for focusing the questions for our discussion here on some of the most fundamental political, social, ethical, and moral challenges facing language speakers, Indigenous communities, and academic researchers who are working each from our respective perspectives towards a vision of the vitality of these languages and the traditional knowledge they embody for generations to come. My point of departure is the citation in the symposium literature from Linda Tuhiwai-Smith that the word research is probably one of the dirtiest words in the Indigenous world's vocabulary. In her book on decolonizing methodologies, research in Indigenous peoples, this is directly preceded by the statement, the term research is inextricably linked to European imperialism and colonialism. A particular moment in the historical evolution of issues related to this, the flurry of endangered language activity over the past 2 decades was in 1991 against the backdrop of this heightened push of bringing to global awareness the endangered language crisis. There was a surge of dedicated research funding for endangered language documentation. So it's important for us to ask what the relevance of this is. First of all, as many communities lamented, often such funds were expressly not for revitalization. They were strictly for documentation. So we want to here interrogate how has research on whether for endangered languages impacted on traditional academic research practice, and what more can or should the Academy do. So there are diverse research models, and in linguistic work on Indigenous languages, as in many other disciplines, the classic academic research paradigm was the familiar one of resource extraction. This is familiar as the archetypal representative of an imperialist, colonialist research agenda. So the issue, since our task here is to problematize the research issues, is that this research paradigm is not necessarily in the community's interests. And as Krauss in his 2010 address to the same body, the Linguistic Society of America, lamented is that there's this tension between theory and contributions to the evolution of a theory of the human language capacity, which is, and of itself, a eminently worthy research enterprise, but it's often disconnected from communities and their goals for language revitalization. Secondly, there's what we might call the free trade agreement. The context of endangered language data might be considered as a parallel to the commodities market, where the wealth of raw materials, the treasured language, traditional knowledge, is exported. In exchange for, you get something back into the community, but the question is, to what degree is that comprehensible to or usable by the community for their goals? And is it therefore a fair trade? Is it embedded, and does it reflect the cultural values, the local context, the worldview, the educational methodologies, and the goals of the local language contact? The third that we might consider is the free enterprise system. And with increased mobility away from reserves and home communities and migration into cities, this research strategy is increasingly common. A researcher seeks out an individual independently of any community governance structures or authorities or even awareness in order to procure access to data that may be deemed by others in the community to be traditional knowledge that is part of the cultural and tangible heritage of the community as a whole. Even if the data acquired by the researcher were in the realm of sanctioned domains, there's nothing in this free enterprise system of research practice that necessarily connects the data that has been documented or the products of the research based on that data back to the community. And then finally, as in number 4, there's been significant progress nurtured by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council in Canada and various other funding agencies on requisite research protocols for Aboriginal engagement and SSHRC's targeted funding for community engagement, a movement towards more genuinely collaborative research models. So what I want to ask briefly is, what more can the Academy do? We can develop curriculum with goals, again, for reciprocal research partnerships. We can negotiate explicit protocols with the endangered language community governing research, asking questions such as the following. And we can hold information workshops for members of Indigenous communities who are involved in endangered language research projects, or indeed in any research projects, so that they can find out what their rights are, what different models of consent exist, how a research participant can track what research results, draw on their data in the future. So in short, it's all about power and control, and the more we academics are willing to co-construct that with our Indigenous collaborators, the more productive will be the research process, the better the research results, and the greater the prospects for meaningfully contributing to endangered language maintenance and revitalization. Heights up.
Thank you, Pat. So I'm really happy to introduce the first of our 3 GICSAN speakers that are with us today. The first is Louise Wilson. So Louise is the brother of Bob Wilson. And John and I first met Louise in the summer of 2006 at a baseball game in Anspayaxw, and she's been incredibly helpful in facilitating our work up north. So Louise, if you'd like to come up. So Louise is from Wilpslus, Anspayaxw.
Abahilu. As I am doyas, Tanit, together, Masquimund, and Oxitum, Amalam, Willem Lach, Yiptit, Saturn. And Oyers Larry Grant will, as in Marat from time, dem with Oyers it wegen dem Willem nach dit. Aside mit Oyers, Tyler and John will edit and will soon skap dessen. Guys, let's rely. Doyers is Ross with Tyler and then the guys Aiden here Wilkerson Gillow multi-lawyer with Aiden. Kamiya is with Buxom. Nedi biscuitum di Willison in Nedi biscuitum score. Castism Scalani ne will I help Ulf Barbloy. I'm choosing time and goody will give you little with heal. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank the people of the from Musqueam for allowing us to be here on their territories. I thank Larry Grant for setting aside a bit of his time to be here this morning to welcome us. I thank Tyler and John for inviting me to be here, to be a part of this. I really put my hands up to Roz, my friend Roz, and former roommate for being here and supporting me, and Tyler, who's in the back, for being here as well, and Aiden, who I met over the summer, and I wasn't expecting to be here in front of you before Barb, as she is my, she does have seniority over me, and I hope Barb understands, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Louise. Okay. So I'm really happy to that Barbara Harris is here. So I've been working with Barbara since the spring of 2005. She's the sister of Doreen Jensen. And Barbara's contribution to our understanding of the language is really immeasurable over the past few years, and she continues to work with the next crop of linguists working on Giksan at UBC. So I'm very, very happy that she's here. And also Cindy Jensen, so this is Doreen Jensen's daughter. And would you guys like to come up together? If you'd like. Okay. So, as Louise mentioned, Barbara has seniority here, and I apologize. The organizers, on behalf of the organizers, we apologize that we had the order mixed up, that Barbara, or that Louise came before Barbara. This is actually a violation of protocol, and we apologize for that, sincerely. Okay, Glock times. Okay, yes.
No, I don't want you to have Glock. Good morning. Amahilu. Lu amskodi will di willy abstism Saturn. Will the nedi will the acted ni like we not as Louise. Yuktem Glocks Tyler. I look forward to Tyler's shame feast for forgetting the Gisan protocol, and I'm going to hold him to it. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the work that I do. I work with Henry and worked with Tyler, a lot of people at UBC, and Lisa, linguists. I was fortunate to have that opportunity. As my goal as an elder was to help in the rejuvenation of the Gitsan language. So I planned my elderhood by going back to higher education so that I could communicate with the younger generations. And in a way that they would understand. I know everything is going so much faster now, but I'm speaking slower and slower. Anyway, this is my niece, Cindy Jensen, my sister's daughter, Doreen Jensen, who is well known to this place here. Unfortunately, she passed away, and we are attempting to take up her work with the language, which she started in the 1950s. And somehow she failed to teach Cindy, or Cindy didn't want to learn. Anyway, she can talk about that. And so now Cindy and I are doing the Master Apprentice program, where I work with her just one-on-one, and she's doing very well. Thank you.
Simkigat, Sigadim Hatnak, and Scuba Wilson. I actually nissim masquim, as a nogasum nuum, as lachirtsum. Lach lo up swai, Cindy Jensen-Fisk, swam amksiwai. Giskast will not athi. Wilps Gael will sawitwi. Anspayaxw will sabakus noi. Doreen Jensen Lewis noi. Hathye wam ditsant. Clara Harris Lewis Tsitsi. I just started out on the Master Apprentice program a year and a half ago, and I would consider myself a non-speaker, and I understood very few words. You know, obviously the little street language I picked up when I was a kid, but probably can't repeat those here. It was never a goal of mine to learn the language, even though I had a mother who was so involved. She told me a lot of things when I was growing up, some of which I must have listened to along the way. And the one thing she told me was that I should always be prepared to say a little something. She just didn't tell me that I would be so nervous. Another thing that she told me was that I needed to acknowledge the people who helped me along the way. So to my aunt, Barbara, who very graciously accepted the position as my master, and I know she doesn't dislike that position, to teach me all of the language that she grew up with, that was her first language. And I want to acknowledge the privilege that I feel being invited by the Department of Linguistics, Lisa and Henry, who encouraged me and helped me at every turn to learn more of the language. To them I say thank you. And I am humbled today to be asked to speak at this symposium. I'm still learning. And what I've discovered is that I've got a long way to go. Thank you.
Apologize again for the protocol error. And thank you very much, Cindy and Barbara. So our next speaker is Loretta Todd, the filmmaker. We're very happy to have her be involved in the first session as well. And I think she's going to speak and show a short clip of her work.
Just the demo? Tansei. Hi to Larry Grant and the Musqueam people, and for being such wonderful hosts to so many of us here on their territory. Also hi to the organizers of this event, but especially hi to the Gitxsan people who I share the stage with, and Larry, who's coming up, I believe, later. So for me, this really is a Gitxsan and Halkamiya time. It's not really Cree time, so I'm going to try to be as brief as I can. And I thank the organizers for letting me be here, because I have to go to a family event this afternoon, so they kind of squeezed me in here. So I know us Crees tend to take up a lot of space, so I'm trying to not to. Also, I would like to thank the grandmothers for bringing us safely here so we can share in these stories. I'm not a linguist. I'm not even a fluent speaker of Cree. I'm a filmmaker, and I believe in the power and the value of word, of language, and image. I grew up hearing my grandparents, father, aunties, and uncles, as well as family visitors, all speak Cree. They would sit around the kitchen table or out back in the yard, and I would sit there wondering what they were saying. Somewhere in my child's mind, I vowed to find out what they were saying. But they didn't teach us, and as an adult, I realized why not. Some were residential school survivors, and all experienced prejudice because of the language. So they were cautious about speaking and worried that they might cause the next generation hardship. And I think, too, that was the way. You learn by listening, interacting. Perhaps if my grandparents had lived longer and my own family didn't become so fractured, I would have picked up the language because I loved to hear it so much. Flash forward to my filmmaking career. When I started to make films, the language was always with me. In my youth, I was fortunate to have worked with Aboriginal organizations and visit many First Nations. So often the elders would say that people had to go to the language for learning, not just to learn the language, but to learn the teachings in the language about governance, about education, about child rearing, and many other teachings. As a filmmaker, I tried to make sense of that in my work. Perhaps only a few words of various languages may be spoken in my films, but more specifically, the teachings and the way of experiencing the world was there. When I was ready to produce my own work, I chose to put the language first and foremost. I thought I would do that to do something to benefit the future generations, my own and my community around me. For that, I created Tansei Nahiawe Tan, a children's series I produced for 3 seasons on APTN. It won a lot of awards, and more importantly, people seemed to like its positive energy and respectful approach to children and their learning. It was kind of a modified, or it is a modified immersion model. I do things that linguists, and I know many traditional speakers don't like. I mix English and the language together. Cree and English is there together. But for me, what was really important is for our children to see themselves learning, so that they see that learning Cree is a positive thing in their life and a fun thing in their life. In the prairies, there's many immersion programs and some remarkable work. Saskatchewan Cree people, you know, I hold my hands up to them. They are like our leaders as far as the work in Alberta and Manitoba. There's so much work being done in Cree and Cree curriculum. And they're always modeling children learning so that our children feel good about learning. So that was sort of the basis for that. But building on that experience, I recently created a Cree language learning app called My Cree. I did it because I wanted to make something for the community and to challenge myself to transfer my knowledge and skill set to another medium. It seems to work because it's quite a popular app. And I did it from the perspective of a filmmaker. So I did it from the perspective of being visual and very rich in terms of the audio quality. But what was critical to me in all of this was that there's a sort of an intimacy, there's a sort of a personalness, there's something where our kids, even if they live in the city, they can bring the language into their everyday life. I know not everybody has iPads or iPhones, and I also knew that many of our learners are adult learners, so they're people in their 20s and 30s that are coming back to the language. And so I knew that many of them had iPads and iPhones, and eventually when I raised more money, Androids and other smartphones. So I knew that even if the children weren't directly the audience for this, what was our young mothers and young fathers who would then interact with the technology and then use it to teach their children as well. We couldn't, because of the iPad, it makes it hard for them to actually show up connected. It's very complicated. So I'm just going to quickly show you a little bit about how it works. I have a series of different cards with the audio, and then we go through different ones, and then there's quizzes, and there's also phrases, and I worked with a wonderful woman named Barbara McLeod, who has been instrumental in documenting and revitalizing and teaching the language in Saskatchewan, who now lives here in Vancouver. that's about it, because I really am conscious of the fact that this is a Gitxsan moment, this is a Gitxsan time, and I'd like to really give that to them. But I encourage you to look at the app. And the other thing it's this MyCree, iTunes, it's free. And if you go to Tansei, TANSI.tv/MyCree, that will take you to our website, and you can look at a little bit more about the app. But really I think what's really critical, Chelsea Vowell, who is a fluent Cree speaker and a Métis blogger and scholar, recently put in her blog a call out, if you like, for all artists and writers and educators and linguists and speakers collaborating together to create new mediums for the language to be shared. I think within the linguistic and the kind of speaker relationship, that sometimes you guys forget that filmmakers, us in the Aboriginal community, even if we're not fluent speakers, we're a great resource. We're really there to help develop things for you, tools for you to work with the language. We have access to facilities and to resources that aren't necessarily within the academic world, and they bring a kind of, like I say, a personal intimacy that then makes it very accessible to our young people. And I think that's really critical. I mean, that's why, for instance, these pictures I chose to put in here were ones in which our youth could see themselves. And there's many images that are rich like that, so that there's things that we can identify with, that they are just kind of doesn't really give you as much of what we can, but it gives you an idea of the kind of the creative spirit that I tried to put into this. So I think I'm just about wrapped up, and I apologize because I can't stay, and really I'm not going to come on the stage. In fact, I'm going to turn this over to you guys. And thank you. Hi.
Thank you, Loretta. So we'll conclude this session by inviting Larry Grant to come back up to the stage. And I echo everyone else here in thanking you and Musqueam for hosting us today. Thank you.
Thank you. See you, Tom. Tyler. You moved to Siam Society to Chiais Tinawel. Thank you. I know the question is about ethics and the boundaries of digitization. And I have a very difficult time with that word ethics, because it's not defined, not really defined in the context of language acquisition, either by the learner or by the linguist or by the academy or by the country. When you have a country that is developed on the doctrine of discovery and then creating a dehumanizing act for the indigenous peoples of the land throughout the world, not just Canada, United States, Australia, New Zealand, Africa, wherever there are uncivilized people. When a country espouses the doctrine of discovery, where does its people acquire ethics? And in the doctrine of discovery, if there's no fence around it, then it's up for grabs. When the words go out into the universe through digitization, is it up for grabs? How do we maintain ethics when Canada, in all of its court actions, denies the actual existence of Indigenous people in Canada. The courts will deny it because the arguments coming from the Academy is very, very strong. The Academy of the law schools. So if you don't have an ethical protocol arrangement, and if you don't have repercussions for breaching those protocols, very much like what you saw today, when the protocol was breached about who was the senior person, who is actually the senior person, regardless of age or whatever. Barbara said Tyler is going to do a shame feast for that breach of protocol. And it's not just Tyler, the organizers, everyone that was involved in creating that document about who was going to be first should be involved in that. That's a repercussion. It's not good enough to say, I'm sorry, we overstepped the boundaries. When you create digitization, who benefits from that? Are there copies, multiple copies given back to the community without charge? Or do they say, we created this, even though you're first author because it's your information, and they won't even say that. They say, I am the author, you are the informant. Therefore, you will come last. However, every word that's written down and every action, every cultural activity that's recorded, the first author are the informant, not the recorder. And I think I've spoken on this before, where when you take my words and claim them to be yours and first author of my words, I do believe there's a protocol of ethics here called plagiarism. So if you take my words and my actions and record everything and say, well, we need your release form to sign this. And in this release form, it's your images, your sound, your actions now belong to the Academy that I can use in whichever way I wish, that I can use out of context to create something out of it. Then where are the ethics? And who benefits from it? When the ethics of Canada can change the goal line on Indigenous peoples continuously since the Confederation, changing the goalpost, changing the goal line, redefining laws for the benefit of the country called Canada, not to the communities, then where is that? It has no real meaning. When they got the ecological laws and requirements just recently, it says to me that Canada is saying, well, if it matters to the Aboriginal people, let them fight the ecological fight against the multinationals that we invite here to invest and extract the resources of Canada. And when we extract the resources of the First Nations peoples by saying to you, to us, we are going to save your language for you. I have all of the mediums that I need, that you need. However, I'm going to archive it all. And for you to access it, you need to get a library card that's going to cost you money so that I can get some money back from your words, from your images. So that's, I come from the viewpoint of Musqueam that has a protocol agreement, a protocol arrangement with the First Nations language program. Took us a few years to organize it. Took us a few years to get the wordsmiths to bring it to where the Musqueam language was part of that. And it wasn't to restrict access to it. It was to make sure that it was acknowledged as Musqueam. And that's something that I think most of the Academy has a problem with. Most of the world's linguists have a problem with that. They're so happy to record your words, so happy to have all the different mediums to work with. However, it's all archived. And very little of it shared within the communities, unless you have the money to come forward and buy it back. And that's something that a protocol agreement with Musqueam has, is we get a piece, we get a copy of everything that's created with the Musqueam language. And that model has been passed around the world, throughout the language communities, with the communities. Not so much with the urban Aboriginal that has been seeked out in isolation, without working with the communities and collaborating. So that's why I have a problem with that word ethics and the work of digitization. If it does not have a protocol arrangement that allows the informants, the communities that are depicted in those video recordings, audio recordings, to be given unlimited access to it, and charging the population of Canada whatever it is that they would charge the Aboriginal people for their works, for their words to come back and to be shared within the community for the generations that are following. So I want to say thank you again to the organizers of this symposium, and I raise my hands in all of thanks to all of the people that are here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Larry. So in the interests of time, what I would like to do now, well, I'd like to thank all of our speakers in our panel today that came up and said some words. There was a very serious teaching moment in there. I was reflecting on this while I was standing behind Larry and what he was saying. And there's a certain special kind of frustration that comes from knowing that you know better about something and then you still make a mistake with it. And in some ways, I'm almost kind of happy it happened that way. It's a very public moment, and we learned something from that. So it's something that to reflect upon in a very public way, and we can learn. So in some ways, I'm grateful for that actually happened. So what I would like to do now is turn it over to the audience, if you have questions for the members of our group up here. Maybe something that interests you in something that they said. This is a very open discussion, so we welcome your participation. We're ending for lunch at what time? Oh, the film first, right, okay. So we have about 15 minutes or so for discussion. I wish it could be longer, but we started a little bit late. So please, if you have any questions. Yes, over here in the corner.
I'm from Musqueam. I'm Audrey. I'm from Musqueam. My question is, do each of you have hope when you consider the idea or the ideology of ethics and digitization and revitalization? Do you have hope that it's going in a good direction, that it will take us somewhere good and reflect the respect and beauty that each of the First Nations inherently hold?
Can you repeat the question? I encourage my students to not play linguistics because they know what to do. But I encourage my students to use all the electronic and digital whatevers, sound and pictures, and to use all that is available now to us to learn your language.
I really appreciate the electronic age and what it can do for us. As far as the ethics goes, we can only really control what we do. And like Auntie Barb did at the beginning, you know, where she very publicly pointed out that Tyler had made a mistake. You know, those are the kinds of things that we can teach you. And like Tyler says, the best way to learn it is by being told publicly. You know, he probably won't forget again.
Add to that, well, maybe I shouldn't have done it publicly, but I was spurred on by the feelings that it evoked in me, being left behind. And that's a feeling that a lot of us have because of residential school. We left our parents, our homes, but we feel left behind, I believe. Probably a psychologist or social worker would have a title for that feeling. So, okay.
Yes, thank you for your question. For me, the approach that Tyler and John took, I was trying to recall how I met John and Tyler. It wasn't bingo. I wasn't playing. I just want to put that out there. I wasn't playing bingo. But bingo, like First Nations are compulsive gamblers. So, but that's not my choice. But their approach was very informal, and so today we're kind of mixing the formal and informal as things are unfolding here, and I think that their approach with me and the way that things unfolded when we started doing this work made me very comfortable, and thus allowed me to trust them that they would carry on in a respectful manner, and that didn't put up any barriers for me. With regards to the protocol and what Barb was talking about, we didn't do much in terms of protocol with Tyler and John. Our concentration was primarily on the language. And so I think I have to take my responsibility with that as well, and not giving them a heads up with regards to protocol. And there's a little bit more to this than what with just Barb and I. We as the Galdoa people, we come from a village within the Gitxsan Nation, and that village is called Galdoa. That's how we identify ourselves. And people from our own nation recognize us as being Galdoa, and that puts us in our own unique category. And you heard my brother talk about that in terms of the language. Our dialect was quite a bit different from the Kispioks. And we migrated down to Kispioks to access education and medical services. And who was there was Barbara's, I think it was her grandfather, Gail? Your brother Gail. And the Gail before your brother. Yeah. My mom's dad. Yeah. My mom's dad. There's my grandfather. And he was the chief of the village. And that's a very significant role because that person spoke on behalf of the village. And thus the protocol would have been for Barbara to speak first. And even if she was younger, and if it was just Cindy that was here, then it would have been Cindy that would speak first because they represent that house. And it's interesting how it's unfolding because although Barbara and Cindy had their lives here, I had an opportunity to introduce myself to Cindy at the Gitxsan Summit last fall and introduce her as a relative and introduce myself as her relative. I don't know if she knew that. But I didn't know how close we were connected. And so I'm really glad to be sharing the stage with them today. Thank you.
I just want to say briefly, I think I've learned an interesting something about ethics from Louise. Actually, it took a long time to get the ethics forms through the mill at UBC, and I don't think we'd had them signed by the time I wanted to publish a photograph of Bob with an article that I was writing, and so I emailed Louise and said. Just wanted to make sure that it's okay with Bob if I publish this with his photograph with the article, and she wrote back saying, yes, it's fine, and if he hadn't wanted you to use the photograph, he wouldn't have let you take it. For me, it was, with the emphasis on sort of written ethics forms and signatures and pieces of paper, and we all know what pieces of paper are worth. It was an interesting kind of moment for me. But on the other hand, I do understand the need to, especially with digital technology, to control it. And when it goes beyond personal relationships, which is where I think the ethics has to start, then I think more formal protocols, of course, are essential.
I want to respond to what I heard from Louise. I've been working with linguists at UBC for the past 10 years at least, and I do teach the culture and along with the words. So Tyler knows what protocol to use, but he didn't, so now he has to pay the consequences.
Just in response to the question a little bit, I do have hope. I am always optimistic that people are considering acknowledging the humanness of Aboriginal people, and that Canada, as the leading country in the world on human rights, will actually step forward and acknowledge that without having to go to court over it or going to the United Nations arena for that. That's something I believe, if those steps are not taken, there's no need for institutions to acquiesce to protocol arrangements with individuals or communities. So that's really where I think it is, where it lies. If the country's laws allow it, then why would an institution act contrary to it and allow it to happen? And there's only one way it will happen, and that's if we all step forward and say our little bit about ethics and human rights, the human rights of people, of human beings, not just human rights of one segment of society. And it's up to us as citizens of this country to step forward and say, we need to make something right, because it's not right. And but I am optimistic, because I would say the general public, once informed, can make a decision on whether or not they want to be considered subhuman along with the First Nations and other people that Canada can pick out arbitrarily. So that's where I would answer the question about I am optimistic, because humans don't want to be treated in that way. And if everyone is considered a human being, then we need to make something right. So that's, and until that happens, I'm skeptical.
We have time for maybe one more quick question or comment. Okay, there's a couple here. Right. Sure, yes.
Larry Grant said that digitization needs a protocol that enables the people to think it, to have unlimited access to a recording. I wonder if the panel thinks that there needs to be more than just access, that perhaps people depicted in the recording would like to have more rights in ongoing management of the representation of themselves, or the recording, or the distribution of it. Almost in the same way as there's been a protocol management event today here in real time.
Is it on? Yeah. I was talking to my cousin, who is new chief Lael in our area now, and she was saying that every time John is showing anything with her in it, he contacts her and makes sure that it's okay. And she was just saying that she was very impressed by that, that you would still do that after all these years, you know, and you know, especially when you hear Louise say that, well, I wouldn't have let you take my picture if I didn't want you to show it. It's still, I think, really important to acknowledge the people who have allowed you into their lives, because really you're taking a little piece of them every time you take a picture or you take their words. So I think it's really important to acknowledge them every time for what they've said and for allowing you to do that.
That means I approve because I'm her master.
I'm just going to turn this because I had a hard time putting it back in. So I know there's like formal protocol in terms of the written word and signing on the dotted line, and I work in an area where all of that is really important, and sometimes nothing moves or gets done unless that happens. And I think, fortunately for myself and all of the people involved with the work that we've been doing, our word is still worth something, you know. And certainly protocol can be developed, and I think if it does get developed to the point where we need to have my lawyer talk to John's lawyer, and you know, that would really take away a lot of the genuineness of the work that has been done and would probably do in the future. And so I hope we do have just a mutual understanding and mutual respect of each other to continue in the way that we're going.
I've just reminded of something that happened with the transplant project that I mentioned earlier. We were working with patients with heart and lung transplants, and inevitably some of them died between us working with them and the exhibition of the work. And we were, according to the release form that patients signed, we had the right to use their images, their voices after they died, regardless of what any relatives might have to say. But the photographer Tim Wainwright and I decided early on in the project that if that circumstance came about and any relative didn't want us to use their images, the voices of their departed loved ones, that we wouldn't use them. But in fact, almost the opposite happened. That people who there was the arts manager at the hospital that we were working with got contacted one day by someone who the wife of a patient that we'd recorded, and he died, and the only recording she had of his voice was on her answer machine at home, and she was sort of desperately trying to figure out a way of re-recording it onto something else before it disappeared. And then she remembered that Tim and I had worked with her husband not that long before he died. She got in touch with the hospital, got in touch with us. We gave her all the recordings, the completely unedited recordings and photographs that we'd taken of him, and she became a really strong kind of supporter of the project. And there were other instances as well where relatives were very glad to have the documentation that we'd made of a very quite a private moment that no one else but she really kind of knew about that moment in her husband's life. So that.
Okay.
I just want to get back to the although. My father was although, and I've talked to the students that I don't want to say teach, because they're doctors, PhDs that I work with, and I've talked to them about Qaldo. It's a separate little part of the Gitsan people from Anspayaxw. And I have my own theory, which I tell to the students about how that came to be. And just briefly, I will say the big canoe, when the flood receded, it got hung up on a mountain right behind Anspayaxw, and I think the people came off the dish, it was called, it means bag. And maybe one of the first places they stopped was called Qaldo. And then, well, there were many people on the dish. And so Qaldo may have gotten too full. So others went down, say, to Anspayaxw and started a village there, and then that got too full. Maybe they moved to Kutubswada Skinner Crossing, to Kitsigukla and Kitwungach. That's what I think, you know. And then after Kitwungach, from Terrace on, there's a whole bunch of villages with the same language but different dialects, and it's all called Samalga. So I wanted to say that about Qaldo, because I talk to people that I work with about that.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. And so we're running about 9 minutes behind schedule here, and as I say, we started a little bit late, so unfortunately we have to move on. I see there were some other questions in the audience here, but we need to move on because we have a screening of Cry Rock coming up after this. But first of all, I'd like to thank each member of our panel today for your perspective and insight and what we could learn from this. Again, there was a teaching moment here today too, which I think was actually a good thing to happen. So I thank you, Larry and Barbara and Cindy, and John and Louise and Pat. Thank you. Thank you for your contribution today. And of course, we've got lots of other things coming up today, and we can continue talking over lunch. There's some more questions here. So I'll turn the podium over to Kate Hennessy now, who will introduce the film Cry Rock. Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler. Hi, everybody. Well, first, I also want to join Tyler in thanking all of the participants in the first session. Thanks also to Larry for welcoming us and giving us the opportunity to be reminded of where we are on Musqueam territory. I'm really very happy to be able to introduce Cry Rock to you today. Some of you may have seen it before, and for those of you who haven't, I think will enjoy it very much. This film by Banshee Hanous, a New Hulk filmmaker, has won in the year alone quite a few awards, including the Indigenous Filmmaker Award at the Social Change Film Festival, Best Short Documentary at the Yorkton Film Festival, the National Film Board of Canada's Kathleen Shannon Award, and the Kodak Image Award at the Women in Film and Television Spotlight Awards. It's been screening across North America and in Europe. And it really raises very creatively many of the questions that are at the heart of the symposium today, and that we'll carry forward into the next session. So the film, we hope, will give us a kind of shared context for exploring some of these ongoing issues that came up just now around digital archiving, the role of the archive, this very significant word, ethics, as Larry has reminded us, and beyond. Banshee Hanous in this film really articulates how language is much more than words on a tape, or a linguistic transcription or annotation or a digital file. She's asking, what does language look like? What does language look like when it's alive in a community? And how can she, as a filmmaker, make us better aware of those issues? We're also very fortunate to have Clyde Talio with us today, who you'll get to know a little bit in the course of the film, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Clyde in our next session, as well as our other panel members, Candice Gala, Mark Turin, and David Nathan after our lunch break. So please enjoy the film, and we look forward to discussing it with you.